All right, ready for a deep dive.
Always.
This time, we're tackling autistic burnout.
Okay.
And we've got this really interesting article from the Outside Substack to guide us.
Sounds intriguing.
It's called Autistic Burnout, Unmasking Capitalism's Role Through the Power Threat Meaning Framework.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Right. So we're talking about burnout, but not just in the typical I need a vacation sense.
Definitely not. I mean, we all get stressed, but this article goes deeper, suggesting that for autistic people, the system itself, especially capitalism, can be a major contributor to burnout.
And the author, Shami Horrocks, she has a PhD and writes from both personal and academic perspectives, so she brings a lot of credibility to the table.
Yeah, and she starts by talking about how we often focus on individual coping mechanisms for burnout, like the ultimate guide to autistic burnout. It has some good advice, but...
It doesn't always address the root cause.
Exactly. She even quotes a line from it that really struck me. It became very draining to act appropriately or blend in when I was with other people.
Oh, I felt that. Like, just existing in certain spaces can be exhausting. So how does this article take it a step further? What's missing from the conversation?
Well, it asks a really important question. What if those individual coping mechanisms aren't enough? What if the problem isn't just how we're dealing with stress, but the systems that are creating that stress in the first place?
It's like, instead of just treating the symptoms, we need to look at the underlying condition. And she uses this term a lot, systemic stressors. What does that even mean?
Right. It sounds a bit academic.
It does.
But basically, imagine a dripping faucet. One drip, no big deal, right? But over time, those drips can wear down even the strongest stone.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
So systemic stressors are like those drips. They're these subtle but constant pressures that build up over time. Think social expectations, workplaces that value speed over well-being, the constant pressure to mask your true self. For autistic individuals, these can be incredibly draining.
It's like constantly swimming against a current. Even if you're a strong swimmer, eventually you're going to get tired, and you might not even realize why you're so exhausted in the first place. So how does capitalism fit into all of this?
Well, think about it. What are the core values of capitalism? Productivity, efficiency, always striving for more. And that's fine, but what happens when you're wired a bit differently? When you thrive on deep focus, on meaningful work, on having the space to really delve into something.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. And then you get told you're not trying hard enough, or you just need to be more resilient.
When really, the system itself isn't designed for your kind of brilliance. And the article talks about how this can lead to a lot of self-doubt, even gaslighting for autistic people.
Absolutely. Because when the dominant culture is built on a neurotypical foundation, anything outside of that norm is often seen as a problem to be fixed.
Instead of celebrating those differences, and this is where the article gets really interesting because it brings up empathy. We often hear that autistic people lack empathy, but this article challenges that assumption.
Right. It talks about how many autistic individuals actually experience hyper-empathy, feeling things much more intensely than neurotypical folks. So imagine being in a workplace that's already demanding, and on top of that, you're absorbing the stress, the anxiety, the emotions of everyone around you.
And then add to that the fact that many autistic people also experience alexithymia, which is difficulty identifying and describing your own emotions.
So not only are you feeling everything, but you might not even know what you're feeling or where it's coming from. It's a recipe for burnout.
No wonder. Yeah. And to make sense of this, the article uses this framework called the Power Threat Meaning Framework, or PTMF. Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
The Power Threat Meaning Framework?
The PTMF.
PTMF.
Yeah.
Is that something I should know about? Though I'll be honest, whenever I hear about a new framework, I'm like, okay, is this just another buzzword?
I get it. But this one is actually really helpful, especially in this context.
Okay, good to know.
Because think about it this way. Imagine you go to the doctor, right? You're not feeling well. And instead of asking about your symptoms, like, what's going on? What are you experiencing? They're just like, yep, you've got a disease of being you. Here's some medication.
That's not very helpful.
Not at all. And unfortunately, that's kind of how we've approached mental health for a long time, especially with neurodiversity.
We pathologize the individual instead of looking at the context they're in.
Exactly. And that's where the PTMF comes in. It shifts the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you.
Oh, I like that.
It's a subtle shift, but it's huge.
It is huge.
Yeah.
Because it acknowledges that our experiences are shaped by the world around us.
Right. So going back to autistic burnout, instead of just assuming someone isn't good at handling stress, we can use the PTMF to ask, What are the ongoing threats they're facing in their environment? What are the power imbalances at play? How have those things contributed to what they're experiencing?
So, for example, that feeling of having to mask your true self at work, that could be seen as a threat response.
Exactly. It's not that you're inherently flawed or incapable, it's that you're constantly having to adapt to a system that wasn't designed for you.
And that constant adaptation, that's exhausting.
It is. It takes a toll. And the PTMF helps us see that burnout as a natural response to an environment that is chronically stressful.
And often invalidating. Like you're constantly being told that who you are is not okay.
Right. And that brings us back to capitalism. Because if you think about it, the very structure of capitalism can exacerbate these feelings of threat and powerlessness, especially for autistic individuals.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear more about this.
Yeah.
How does capitalism as a system play into this? You talked about this analogy earlier with the whole square peg, round hole thing.
Right. Well, let's break that down a bit more. So many workplaces, they're structured in a very specific way, right?
Hierarchies, competition, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And there's this huge emphasis on individual achievement, on speed, on efficiency. Now, imagine you're an autistic person whose strengths lie in collaboration or in deep focus on a particular task. Or maybe you need a more flexible work environment to do your best work. The system, as it currently stands, doesn't have a lot of room for those differences.
It's like we're constantly trying to measure everyone against this very specific, very narrow definition of success.
And if you don't fit that mold, you're made to feel like you're not trying hard enough or you're not good enough.
When really you're just wired differently.
Exactly. And that constant pressure to conform, to mask those parts of yourself that don't fit in, that's incredibly draining.
It's exhausting. And the article argues that this exhaustion is a major factor in autistic burnout.
It makes sense, right? It's like being a round peg, trying to jam yourself into a square hole day after day. You might be able to do it for a while, but eventually something's got to give.
So what do we do about it? It's not like we can just dismantle capitalism overnight.
We can't. Systemic change takes time, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. Even small changes can make a big difference.
Like what? Give us some examples. Give us some examples. Where do we even begin?
Well, it starts with that old saying, put your own oxygen mask on first, before helping others.
Right. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. So if you're feeling burnt out, self-care is essential. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy or expensive. It's just about figuring out what truly helps you recharge.
Yeah, because what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. For some people, a long bath is relaxing. For me, sensory overload. So it's about finding what works for you. Maybe it's noise-canceling headphones for a few minutes each day, or a walk in nature, or spending time on a special interest. Whatever helps you find a bit of peace.
So it's about identifying those things within your control that you can change and then setting boundaries where you can.
Yes. And once you've done that, you can start to look at the bigger picture. The article talks about challenging the culture of overwork that's so prevalent, especially in capitalist societies.
Right, the whole hustle culture mentality.
Exactly. And that's not just about working less, although that's important too. It's about questioning what we value, how we define success. What if, instead of rewarding the person who works the longest hours, we rewarded creativity, collaboration, innovation, those things that actually make a difference.
It's like we've been playing the same game by the same rules for so long, we've forgotten that we can change the rules.
Exactly. And that's where collective action comes in. Supporting organizations that are championing neurodiversity, advocating for more inclusive policies, even just having these conversations. These are all ways to create change.
It's about changing the system itself, not just trying to fit into a system that wasn't designed for us.
Right. And the author, Jamie, she makes a really important point at the end of the article. She says that addressing autistic burnout, it's not just about making things better for autistic people.
It's about making a better world for everyone.
Exactly. When we create a world that embraces neurodiversity in all its forms, we all benefit.
We unlock so much more potential.
Absolutely. Different ways of thinking, different ways of solving problems. We need that.
It's true. Diversity is not just a buzzword. It's essential.
Couldn't agree more.
So, to wrap things up, it sounds like we have a lot of work to do, both individually and collectively.
We do, but it's important work.
Absolutely. And it starts with understanding how these systemic factors like capitalism play a role in autistic burnout. And then we can start to build a world where everyone can thrive, not just survive. So that's our deep dive on autistic burnout. Be sure to check out Jamie Hork's full article on the Outside Substack. Lots more to explore there. And until next time, keep asking those big questions.